So, do you want to maybe tell us what is The Lonely Beast for people who don't know?
We described the story. He's very lonely. He misses other beasts of his type, and roves around the world and goes on a long journey to find beasts like him. And well, I'm not going to spoil the end for you, but basically, uh, we we're the worst kind of Apple nerds, I suppose, and that's okay to say that in front of this room, I would imagine. I remember when the iPad first came out, you couldn't get it in Dublin, so I took the bus up to Belfast purely to buy an iPad, and I feel kind of awkward saying that, but yes, it's true.
I can't believe you told the whole room.
Yeah, sorry. So we were kind of obsessed with the iPad and the sort of possibilities it offered for publishing. So like I'd fallen in love with Chris's Beast character already. He'd been playing around with it for years, and I knew it before the book had ever happened. And the book had launched, and it was a huge success. It was Children's Book of the Year in 2011, was it? And we just decided that maybe this was an area we wanted to do, was to work on apps for kids.
So, did you approach Chris with the idea of making it into an app? Did he approach you? Where was kind of genesis of that?
Well, we had both come up with the idea of having like some kind of publishing platform on the iPad, and the iPad was at the very early stages, so we had no real idea of what this was going to actually become. So we kind of had this idea of having this gloriously designed magazine that would have a lot of visual stuff, and had this lovely idea, but then we had no real idea of how to actually put this together. So we spoke to Chris about the idea of maybe doing something in conjunction with him, and then he was like, well, what about using the Beast? Except he said, no, I don't want to do the book as a book, an e-book. So it was kind of the three of us met in a pub one Thursday night and sat down and kind of brainstormed. And I suppose we came up with the first app we did was the ABC app, and it kind of went from there, I suppose. Yeah.
And I saw that you ran a fund to fund, obviously, the development of The Lonely Beast. Was that something you thought of from the very beginning? Was that something you realised that you'd have to do as time went on, and maybe it took a bit longer than you were expecting? Or how did you decide to use that platform?
Well, I think like there's been a lot of good advice about putting together a business plan and doing market research and doing all that in the lead up to the app, and you absolutely should do that, but it's not completely essential. We got things kind of back-assward, and it was a little bit all over the place, and we ended up doing all these things anyway. But I think it was a case of the fund. It was really it came out of the fact that we put together the prototypes for the apps, the storyboard, the interaction design, all of that, and our idea was then that we would hand it off to a third-party developer, and that was kind of the plan all along. Until we went and asked people for quotes, and then we realised we couldn't afford any of them. So
I think it was Claire mentioned about the Web 1.0 push, or the bubble, and it was very much that. We got quotes from all over the shop, ranging from kind of reasonable to like, you know, almost six-figure sums. Not quite, but like it was like, oh, okay, let's go back to the drawing board with this. So.
And James, did you coded the app? So did you learn that from scratch just for this, or was that something you'd always wanted to do? Was something you had dipped your toe in before?
It was something I never ever wanted to do in my entire life. It didn't appeal to me at all. But we had no choice. I mean,
no. When James he's lying. When James was a child, he dreamed of coding from day one, and yeah, no.
How did you draw the short straw out of the three then that you had to learn?
I was the first one to kind of get like a little icon on my phone that launched something, and you, as much as I didn't want to do it, you really didn't want to do it.
No, I really didn't want to do it. Yeah.
So like there was sorry, to go back to the funded question. Funded was as much about the awareness of building hype before the app than it was about the actual money, because the money didn't really cover any of our time that we spent doing it. So it was great for building a critical mass of people who, as well as you were essentially doing pre-sales for the app with the funded, but also that people were excited about it, that they were invested in it, and that they would go and spread the word. They felt essentially a part of the project, you know.
So you say that you didn't go the traditional business plan route, but surely you did some research into what else was out there at that time. What was the kind of app store looking like when you first
It was relatively early days, and I suppose like there was a lot of ABC apps. Like our first app is essentially 26 plates, A to Z, this is the beast doing different things. We'll go into this maybe at some stage, but the other things that are out there, like there's a stock photo of an apple and a really like Comic Sans A, and you click it and it was like A is for Apple, and this is what the people were selling and it seems to be making money on it. But I mean, we were just all aghast at this horror that was like a photo of an apple, you know, and we kind of just wanted to get as far away from that as possible. So I mean, we did a lot of research into what else was out there, and there was some terribly designed apps. Design played a big part of it for us. I think we really wanted to have a really beautiful looking app.
And how did you find working, the three of you obviously are from very different, disparate backgrounds. How did you find collaborating together? Did you work in the same office? Did you just dedicate a portion of the year to it and all work together? Or how did you do that?
The way it worked initially was we all came together for the initial storyboarding, and we had a very clear idea of most of what the app was going to look like, how it was going to work, what it wasn't going to do. I mean, a lot of the design process was removing things, was taking stuff out. I think if you ask users what they might want from a potential app that doesn't yet exist, they'll give you a laundry list of features. But if you look at, I think there was some app analytics crowd that did a study of the keywords that kept cropping up in App Store reviews, and the success of an app, the ratings of an app were strongly correlated with the use of the word simple. So if you just take more and more stuff away until you're left with basically the essentials of what you have to have. And as well as that, we were kind of limited in our technical ability, so that was kind of a function of what
we kind of wanted to like trick people into thinking they were seeing something they weren't seeing, and you know, not using animation. And I think one thing we it was only when we added like sound to it that we realized that actually it looks like it's moving, you know. And then we quickly cottoned onto this, and this became a thing, especially in the first app. I think in the second app it's become much more. Well, James has learned to code much better now at this stage. So yeah.
And James, how did you go about learning?
Lots of YouTube tutorials from 10-year-olds, basically. They're just obscenely talented 10-year-olds. And it's very difficult to listen to a 10-year-old give you instructions on things you don't really understand, and have to watch it 5 times in order to get what they're trying to say to you. I bought some books. Really, it was a case of only knowing what I needed to know to do the things that I wanted. And I think that was brought up earlier as well, that you need to have a goal, you need to have something that you're working towards, and that really helps. If you keep banging your head off the wall long enough, you'll eventually work out a way to do it.
So you both mentioned that design was obviously key in terms of the development of this app. How did you find designing for an audience that maybe can't read, obviously, or they wouldn't be using your app, but also that there's parents involved? How did you manage the kind of interactive design aspect of the app?
Well, I mean, I guess like it was we had a good starting point. We had Chris's books, and you know that was great. But at the same time, Chris's books hadn't been animated or hadn't been kind of featured any kind of interaction, and we were also kind of querying about like how does the beast react if he's talking to the audience, and you know his audience is less than like 2-3 years old, so learning their numbers and letters for the first time, I suppose. So you know, it was kind of a case of talking to friends who had kids. Now 2 of the 3 have kids themselves, so things are kind of getting easier in that sense. But you know, it was literally talking to people saying, so. You know, 1 to 3 is inherent with kids. Once you get past that, it turns into logic, and so we had to research essentially how parents teach and when they teach and what, you know, how much kids pick up. So we were learning through that way, I suppose. But it was tricky enough, like figuring all that out. Like,
again, simplicity was key. I mean, Toca Boca, Claire talked about Toca Boca earlier on, and they're killing it in the App Store. They're doing amazingly well. And one thing that we learned from them was that a kid of 3 or 4 has to be able to know how to use your app within 5 seconds. And if they don't, they're just going to close it down, you know. So we design for kids on that front, and we design for adults in the sense that it has to be entertaining for them. It has to be primarily not annoying for them. You know, I mean, we toyed with the idea of if a kid keeps pressing the same thing over 10 times, then it moves on to the next thing. We decided not to do that because you can't take that away from kids. But like the sound effects didn't, you know, couldn't sound like a drill hammer on somebody's head all the time, you know. And there had to be moments of humor that would be funny enough for adults and funny enough for kids at the same time. So sometimes there's the Beast dressed up as James Joyce, and sometimes it's the Beast farting in a bath.
The Beast farts in the bath here.
Which spans all of the age groups in terms of humor. So.
And how long did it take you to develop it from concept stage up to getting it in the App Store? And how long did you think it would take you?
It took us about 8 months. I had absolutely no idea how long it would take us. I kind of wished that it would have taken a lot less time, but like most of that time was just me figuring out how to do stuff, you know. Like by the time we had all the storyboarding together, you know, it
was the first 3 months we kind of had all the storyboards together, but then it was kind of back and forth, coming up with new ideas, seeing what we could actually achieve just through very minimal change, and how much that can actually affect and really make the app look so much better. Because the first few times that James came to me and Chris with, hey look, you know, here's it launches, and me and Chris were like trying to do things and move things, and he's like, no, it's just a static screen, nothing happens. We're like, okay, well look, we've got that, the icon launches, and there we go, that's great, you know.
I can't tell you the sense of achievement that I got from that, only to be pissed on by your looks of disappointment.
I'm still saying sorry for that, so yeah, apologies.
Were there any issues that you didn't foresee in the beginning that became apparent as you went on, or was it fairly smooth sailing, or maybe you foresaw all the issues?
Well, somebody mentioned your name and how important that is, and how important it is to research all of this, and we did a lot of research with that. And the fact is, Chris had the Lonely Beast book out there, so we were like, okay, this is great. We originally called our app Alpha Beast. Made sense, Alphabet Beast, you know, even though you hate portmanteaus. But anyway, and we went with that, and we launched it in the App Store, and it was great, and Apple approved it, and bang, bang, bang. We then got this very serious email from a company in California telling us, cease and desist, we own this name. We're like, well, we're based in Ireland, you know, okay, we're selling it internationally, and so this legal battle ensued. Even though they didn't have any apps, they had no software, they were a plush toy company who in the next 3 years intended to apply for. Anyway, look, without going into too much detail, this kind of stopped us in our tracks for a while, and anyway, it's been resolved ever since. But your name, that's one thing we've learned from this, is your name is really important.
Do a trademark search.
Yes.
Early on.
Brilliant. Something that a few of the previous speakers in the last Q&A brought up was that the real work begins when you finish the app, and you actually have to get people to download it and, you know, talk about it. And your app was obviously incredibly successful. It was number 1 in 10 countries in the App Store under the children's section, and I believe you won some awards for it, various things, really good press. First of all, did you have a plan for that? And secondly, how did you go about getting all that good press?
Generally, when you ask us, did we have a plan in any of these sections of the question, the answer is going to be no, we did not have a plan. But so we just winged it all the way, and you know, I think, like, I had worked in magazines, and I'd seen press releases come in across my desk, and I'd seen how terrible the majority of them are. And basically, you just have to try and find, you have to try and work for the other person a little bit. You have to try and find a story that's good for them. You have to give them a hook to hang a story off. And I think, like, one of our big breakthroughs was being featured on Boing Boing.
Yeah, Boing Boing was a big thing.
And that was amazing. And we actually kind of worked a little bit around that for ages. And I remember it was like Mark Frauenfelder from Boing Boing who mentioned us, and I had watched, or I'd listened to his podcast, where he has a podcast where he deals with kids' apps, and I'd listened to his podcast, and he'd mentioned something about Leisure Suit Larry, which I don't know if anybody in the audience knows that, but really inappropriate thing to mention in a kids app podcast. So I just mentioned it to him in the email, and suddenly I had something different in my email than the hundreds of that cross his desk every day. So that was like a way into a conversation with him. And then I think it was months afterwards it eventually featured. And then we I think, like, it was a long line from that, but basically once you've been featured on Boing Boing, it's it opens other doors for you, you know, and you can talk to people. Oh, look, where the app is featured on Boing Boing, yeah. And so eventually Apple featured us, and I think that's something that you really have to strive for.
But it's a dark art when trying to get Apple to feature you. Like, well, you can't try; it just happens. You know, there's billboards all over the world with one of our screenshots. I don't think it's this one, but you know, and then there's in like a TV ad for the iPad Mini, and that's incredible. But to try and get that, to actually acquire that, it's an impossible thing to try and figure out.
There are a few things you can do to help yourself, though. Make it look nice. Show off the features of any new features of Apple's hardware. If you show them off, they're happy to. You know, they showcase you in order because you showcase them. Have a nice icon, and just do something that's generally nice, and also make a splash in the press. That's nothing to do with Apple, you know. If they'll notice that this happens, you know, and it may or may not happen. You know, we were lucky that it did, but definitely there's lots you can do to make sure that it's more likely, I guess.
Brilliant. And since then, you've obviously developed the 123 Lonely Beast app as well. How did that compare to your first time round?
We knocked that out in a week. No. I'd say like it was quicker, and it is technically a smaller app. You know, obviously we went from 1 to 12 as opposed to ABC, which is 26 plates as opposed to 12. So it was quicker. We were able to sit down and focus and know exactly what steps to take. So in terms of, you know, developing the app second time around, it was definitely a quicker process, but almost it added a whole new level of mechanics to try and figure out what kids can and can't understand about numbers. That, you know, isn't the case with the alpha. Now, that's very specific to our apps, but definitely second time round is a much faster process. Which
here's something interesting actually. If you're dealing with kids apps, and again this is Toca Boca, but there's no voiceover in any of their apps, right? Which means they don't really have to localize anything, right? So they don't have to spend any money on localization. Now we have plenty of voiceover in our ABC app, and trying to basically Apple in order that we would be featured in the Apple TV ad, they came to us and asked us, can you you've about 2 weeks, is there any way you can localize
it's a German
it into
version,
German, French, Mandarin, Chinese, you know, and they gave us this long laundry list because they're so used to dealing with large companies and go, yeah, I'll just put a department on that, that's fine. And there's just me sitting in the office and going, no, I don't think that's going to be possible. So, but they went, you know, they were in the ad anyway. So, but if you don't have any voiceover, you don't have to deal with any of that. So that's like kind of a cost saving.
In saying that, like with the numbers, it's different. We are starting to localize the numbers in international markets, so that's something anyway. But with the alphabet, no.
That's brilliant. I guess I'll open it up to the floor now. If anyone has any questions for the guys.
Hi guys. I'm just wondering, like, obviously you've got like Chris doing the illustrations and they look fantastic. He's an illustrator, he's not like a UX guy, I guess. Like in terms of the user experience or anything, I know you said you haven't planned anything. How did you approach that? Was it just, again, just kind of using what Chris provided in terms of illustration and trying to play around with it? Or was there like any kind of process behind it?
No, we had the mechanics down before Chris ever put pen to paper. Before even we storyboarded any of it, we knew how it was going to work, and it was going to be very simple and very straightforward. And I think we toyed around with various different ideas of how it would work, and just came to the conclusion very quickly that kids don't want anything complex. It has to be very, very straightforward. So all you do to navigate is to swipe, and if like kids pick that up from like 2 to 3. You know, they pick up the swipe thing very, very quickly, and then it's just to tap on the individual things to make them react. And you know, that was as simple and straightforward as it was. But it was like there was a process in getting to that, and that was just a rejection of complexity. Really, is all it was.
Thanks very much. Anyone else? Yeah.
Hi, I'm just wondering where to next after the Lonely Beast. Are you planning kind of things beyond the Beast itself? New endeavours, or will there be more Beast?
I've come to James with about 6 ideas and he's rubbished them all. So I'll still come up with ideas, but I think he's going to rubbish them all. But we'll find one maybe that we can agree on.
Yeah, there's a couple of things in production at the moment, some Beast related and some not, and I can't talk about any of them at the moment. But yes, there's more Beast and there's more not Beast as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, just in the front.
Hey, really nice app. I really like it. Just from the technical point of view, I'm not sure, but did you develop in Flash Builder or something, or is it native app?
Yeah, it's the Air SDK that we used, simply because I guess it was kind of the one that I stumbled on first and one that seemed like accessible and well documented. So.
And you can port it to iPad and all that.
You can port it to Android. Yes, we haven't done that yet because I can't guarantee that like you'd have the same level of user experience on Android, just simply because we can't test on that range of devices.
So many screen sizes in Android that it's so hard to figure out. Like with an app like this,
Yeah.
just everything gets resized automatically, and we just have no way of knowing if that tree is going to look like that. The birds could be halfway down the wall, and you know, it's very hard to know.
So the question would be, regarding to the tools, you know, last week was the Adobe outage. You know, Adobe was down for 24 hours.
Yes,
That's a
I know
pain.
all about it.
So I'm thinking, you know, if I want to develop tool, I'm an illustrator and I want to develop games like this or something, if there is a better tool you would use or for the future you would consider, what would be your advice for better tools instead of Adobe? I want to go out from the cloud, that you need to, you know, all that.
Yeah,
so what do you recommend?
I think we'll probably be moving to Unity very soon.
So do you think this can be work well in Unity and all
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. Yeah. Again, it's more stuff that I need to learn, but you know,
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
I suppose one final question. What impact have the two apps had on your respective careers, if any?
Well, like it's, I guess for me, it brings me close. Like I work as a freelance designer, and I've worked in editorial design, so I've worked in magazines and books and so on. And really, what I wanted to do was to be able to, like, it's the oldest thing in the world, is just to be able to make stuff and make good stuff and sell it to people. And like what interested me most about this was, if you work in a magazine here, you probably are only going to sell it within this country. And I just wanted to see work go beyond these shores, and like this is kind of the technology that's enabled me to do that. So
It's amazing being able to track when someone in the Solomon Islands buys your app. You're like, who is that? Is there somebody there? Is there somebody's child playing with our app there? You know, that's kind of amazing. Like, and when you see that, that makes us very happy, I think. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much. I'd love to get a round of applause for the two guys.